back of the rim. Garnett on the slam foul. Using Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry.
9, 60, 57, 52, 0, and 5. Those numbers are the total games Kawhi Leonard has played in each season dating back to 2018, when we first realized there may be a problem. Weirdest part about it? The first time he was truly seen as best player in the league material was around 2016 or 17, meaning that he spent the majority of his time as an elite player missing games. Even with that, he's tallied up 5 All-Star appearances, 2 titles and Finals MVPs, along with 2 Defensive Player of the Years and a spot on the NBA's 75th anniversary team. A huge contributor to his placement there came in the 2019 playoffs, where we unsuspectingly ran into one of the greatest playoff runs we're likely to ever see. Now that it's been long enough, let's take a look back at what he put together. The 2019 Eastern Conference was putting some of what we see today in play, featuring the Bucks' first year as a contender, the Celtics with a young Tatum and Brown, the best Sixers team to date in the Joel Embiid era, and of course the Raptors, who probably could have lasted years beyond this. Kawhi himself that season was everything they hoped he'd be, having been deposited on top of a squad that had been right at the doorstep of greatness for some time now. Having won nearly 60 games despite him only having played 60, there were some hefty expectations that would be tough to materialize in an East that was more or less wide open between those 4 contenders. To kick things off, they'd have to get through the warm-up round, which they handled fairly easily after suffering the Game 1 Orlando Magic. Once the dust settled, Leonard had already set the tone, averaging 28, 7, and 3 on a cool 56% from the field and 54% from 3. However, this next round was expected to be a bloodbath for all participating parties, even though that only actually materialized for the Raptors and Sixers. Philly too had made a quote-unquote go-for-it move by acquiring Jimmy Butler on what was already a fairly talented team. The defensive trio of Simmons, Butler, and Embiid was sure to be a nightmare to deal with, and that it was. Through the first 4 matches, neither team had been able to create much distance, drawing at 2-2. Kawhi himself by this point had tallied 152 points, at times going shot for shot with Philly to keep his squad in it. It was around this time we'd started to invoke the 2009 LeBron run, where he posted similar Herculean efforts only to fall short. Suffering that same fate was a very realistic path up until the final seconds, where he'd give us one of the NBA history's greatest moments.
Defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
Had that shot not have dropped, history could look very different. That Sixers team was absolutely worth the finals appearance, but by the work of Kawhi, it only turned to tears. The 39 field goal attempts he'd put up in Game 7 was the most since Elgin Baylor hoisted 40 in the 1962 NBA Finals. The 243 points he scored in this series were the most since Michael Jordan dropped 246 on the Suns in the 1993 Finals. And the shot? That was the first, and still to this day, only Game 7 buzzer-beating game winner in NBA history. Finishing the series with 40 minutes a game, averaging 35 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists on 53% from the field, it'd taken quite literally everything from him to reach the conference finals, where the toughest challenges still laid ahead. This much was evident, as despite him continuing to stay hot, tallying 62 points total in the next 2 games, the Bucks would take a 2-0 lead back to Toronto, Giannis looking poised as ever to make his first finals appearance. With him taking home MVP and the Bucks sitting atop the conference, it had almost become expected throughout the year. And this is the story we've long forgotten, that at the time, Giannis vs Kawhi battling for dominance of the East seemed as if it would have a long shelf life. This with the media ever so eager to pass LeBron's torch to Giannis, who seemed to be a safe bet as next up. However, once again, by the time Game 4 had come to pass, we were all knotted up with it beginning to become a story that the Raptors could slow Giannis down ever so slightly. In Game 4, while only having scored 19 points, Kawhi had guarded the Greek Freak over 3 times as much as any other Raptors player. In those 34 matchups, Giannis went 3 of 7, turned the ball over twice, only tallied 1 assist, drew no fouls, and the Bucks' offensive rating took a nosedive. As a matter of fact, if you take it back another game, you can see that out of necessity, Kawhi essentially became his primary defender, both helping to result in Raptors wins and likely rescuing their season. In Game 6, Giannis would shoot just 38% while Kawhi shined and proved that while the future may belong to him, he just wasn't ready yet.
He lost it. Lowry with the steal. He has Giannis behind him. Gets to Leonard. A facial by Kawhi Leonard over Giannis on the
I feel like this is one of the most forgotten posters in playoff history. It's an elimination game, and Kawhi Leonard, in the midst of this incredible run, picks out the MVP who's expected to win this series, and becomes one of the few players that season to absolutely obliterate him. To this point, he totaled 11 games with at least 30 points, which put him in playoff air with Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon. He was up to 31 points per game, which made him one of 6 players to average 31 or more in a single postseason. Perhaps most importantly, his 5.4 points per game in the clutch ranked him first amongst active players. There were a million stats by then to justify what our eyes were already telling us, but in any case, he'd now been the driving force behind toppling 2 juggernauts, yet there was one more to face. Hard times had begun to befall on Golden State by the finals, with an injury to KD sidelining him for much of the playoffs, and a roster that was built to accommodate KD, aka they were not that great outside of the core. However, nobody was going to mention that or feel sympathy. It was a well-known fact that if injuries or free agency did not break this team up, there was a 99% chance they weren't straight up losing a series to anybody. So as far as most people were concerned, these finals were just fair game. In any case, Kawhi would go on to add 3 more 30-point games to his total. The Warriors were able to make it interesting, but after Durant went out for good following a brief comeback, and Klay Thompson suffering his torn ACL, reality set in fairly quickly. For the first time in franchise history, following one of the most dominant one-man playoff runs of all time, the Raptors were champions. This is not to say Kawhi didn't have help. It was a fantastic all-around team. But in getting through the East, when Kawhi wasn't posting Herculean efforts, offense could seem difficult to come by. He'd been traded to a team he had no interest in being on, taking them all the way in his first season there, and cemented his name amongst the greats. Which is insane when you look at his career as a whole, because if you take this run away, all of a sudden you've got a guy who once won a ring and finals MVP on a dominant Spurs team when he was younger, and a great defender for the time that he's healthy, who to this day has scored less points than Andrew Wiggins. Yet that's how NBA history happens. Exactly one moment, one shot, one situation can change absolutely everything. And this run alone, for one summer, had fans questioning if he was the greatest player on the planet. A two-way superstar who went to extremes on each end of the floor to keep his team afloat. At this point, it's unlikely we'll ever see him duplicate anything close to this, but nobody will ever forget the run of 2019 Kawhi Leonard.